It's good to see you tonight. Welcome to our Truth Seekers event on this third Tuesday of the month. If you remember, we are going to be meeting the first and third Tuesdays of every month here. We will have a live stream and then discussion afterwards. And so you're always welcome to come join us here at Journey or just watch us online. You can always find us on our YouTube page. Or we put it on podcast as well afterwards. You can just search Journey Elgin Church on whatever podcast player you use, or on YouTube. We're starting a Rumble page as well. We cannot live stream to that, but we upload these videos to our Rumble page as well. So if you remember last week, we kind of introduced what Truth Seekers was all about. That at Truth Seekers, what our purpose is, what our principles are. Our purpose is to awake those who do not realize or recognize the heightened spiritual battle that we are involved in and our desperate need for a spiritual awakening. Right? I believe there's many people who are not aware, who do not recognize the seriousness or do not recognize where it's coming from. We also want to equip ourselves to engage with the world around us, to engage with and push back against the evil ideologies that are out there. Well, that includes getting involved in government and talking about political things. And this is an area where the church has struggled. And there are many people many Christians who kind of struggle with, what is our role? How do we push back against the government? We obviously don't want to foment revolution. Right? That's not our goal. We don't want violence to come. But is there a place to push back, to stand up? Is there a place to say, no, I will not comply? And one of the passages of Scripture and one of our principles is that we are basing this on biblical truth. We are basing what we believe on the truth that is found in Scripture. And so one of the scriptures that is used to kind of push back against getting involved with governmental matters is Romans chapter 13. So we're going to look at that first today, Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. This is a passage where Paul is talking about submitting to the earthly authorities. Okay, so let's read Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. It says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." It says, "Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves." Verse 3, "For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended." Verse 4, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to authorities, not only because of the possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. Okay. So what is Paul talking about? Remember, Paul is writing to the church in Rome. The church in Rome is under a Caesar. Probably at this time is under Nero. Nero hasn't gone crazy yet, but the church has already experienced some persecution and things like that. But now they're experiencing a relatively decent time. So there's a lot of contextual things going on with the culture and the type of government that they are under. And Paul is very, very wisely saying, you've got to be careful with that, right? You don't want to intentionally antagonize the Caesar because that's not going to go well for you. There's that going on. There's a few other things that I think it's important as we read that, because if you read that, many people will take that as unlimited submission, that we are just supposed to submit to the earthly authorities because those earthly authorities come from God. And so whatever they say, we've got to do. Well, you have to be careful with that. You step back because you've got to examine all of Scripture. There's other places in Scripture that talk about the importance of submission, right? Wives, submit to your husbands. Well, does that mean that a wife does everything that the husband says? Of course not, right? We all know that to be true. That is not what that is meaning. Now, ideally, what you should be striving for is a ordered relationship, right? That where both are working for the good of each other, right? And so the best way for that to work in Romans 13, in regards to Romans 13, is that the government is looking out for the good of its citizens. So its citizens are willing to submit to the government because the government is looking out for their good and is pushing back against evil, right? That doesn't mean the citizen should should submit to the government in unlimited fashion. That is clearly not what that means. And then just think of it practically. If Paul and Peter write some of this as well about listening to the authorities, if they meant that was to be an unlimited submission, that no matter what the government says you do, why were they imprisoned? Right? They were imprisoned and they were martyred because they did not submit to authorities. You look throughout Scripture, going all the way back to when the people were enslaved in Egypt. The Hebrew midwives, what did they do? They refused to follow the order of Pharaoh. Moses' parents, they refused to follow the order of the Pharaoh, and they snuck Moses out. Right? You go through Esther. Esther, it was not, you couldn't just go to the king unannounced, but yet she did in order to save her people. You have Daniel, who was told you can't worship God. You have to pray to Nebuchadnezzar or Darius. And what did he do? He gets thrown into the lion's den because he didn't what? He did not submit. He did not comply with what the government was asking of him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get thrown into a fiery furnace because they would not bow to the golden image of King Nebuchadnezzar. They did not submit. You have Jesus not submitting to the laws of the authorities, right? The Romans had given the authority to the Jewish leaders to enact their religious laws. Jesus went against those. Remember, they tried to hold him, tick the religious leaders off whenever Jesus did things on the Sabbath, right? And then ultimately, there was no way that Jesus was going to be crucified if it couldn't be at least alleged that he was breaking Roman law. And so by claiming to be king, he was usurping the power of Caesar, which went against the government law, and so therefore he was able to be crucified. So we see throughout Scripture that there are numerous people who did not submit to governing authorities. Now, there are consequences. Always there are consequences to be paid. Right? The governing authorities do have power. But Romans 13 is not saying that there is not a time for us to stand up and not comply. More modern examples, we see this. We see these many of these people as heroes. You look at our American founders. Now, interestingly, there are people that believe that the American founders were sinful. There were preachers during that day that preached against what the founders were doing and how they were pushing back and standing up against the tyranny that was coming from England. But then there were also pastors who stood right with them. In fact, more that stood with them and preached freedom from tyranny, and that it was time to throw off this tyrannical government. Right? You have people like Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad. She was breaking law. Do we have a problem with that? Of course not, because it was evil. She was trying to free slaves. Right? We have Corrie ten Boom, Oskar Schindler, Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany, that were trying to free and protect Jewish people from the evil of Hitler and Nazi Germany. Right? We have Martin Luther King Jr. and his civil rights of breaking laws, right? But doing it in a peaceful way, doing it in a controlled manner, in order to reveal the hypocrisy and the evil of many of those laws, he was not submitting to the authorities. Right? He was submitting to God. And that's how change came about. And it is vital for us to understand that Romans 13 is not calling us just to follow everything that the government does. It is calling us to recognize that God has established order, that every government is under God, right? Which means that our ultimate authority is to God himself, because he's the ultimate authority, not the government. It's reminding us of that. And we should follow the government when the government is doing what God desires, which is to seek the good of people and push back against evil. Now, we talked about context a little bit earlier. It's important to understand the context. That was in a dictatorship, right? So it was a little bit different. Our system of government is set up completely different. We are set up in a republic. Our system is designed for us to be involved in that system, to get involved. And I believe as Christians, we need to make sure we are getting involved within our government and allowing our voices to be heard. And I think sometimes we've stepped back. We've just kind of said, oh, you know what, everything's going to be fine. We live in this free society that is going to look out for our freedoms. I don't want to get involved in all the political stuff, because when you do that, it causes controversy and all of this stuff that makes churches very uncomfortable. Right? But yet our system of government was designed for us to be involved. It was designed on basic biblical principles. The whole idea of a republic, we are not a democracy, we are a republic, a representative republic. That comes from the Old Testament. Right? You have groups of people who elect a representative, and then that representative is part of another body, and all of it fits together in a godly style of government. And our government originally fit pretty closely with that and was certainly based on biblical principles. Well, if we don't get involved with the government, then how are we going to hold it accountable to follow the biblical principles? And I'm not saying that means everyone has to become a Christian in this in the United States of America. Of course not. But if we start pulling out the biblical foundations of our government in which it was founded on, the ramifications of that are dire. And I believe we're starting to see some of those ramifications. And so I do not believe that Romans 13 is an excuse to not get involved with the government and not to push back against the government, and also to at times say, no, we will not comply. Now, why is this important to talk about? It's like, well, what does it matter, right? What if churches just want to, go along and just, not ruffle any feathers, just kind of everything be calm and just leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. Okay. When we do that, the opportunity for evil increases, because we are called as Christians, as the church, to push back against the evil ideologies in this world. And we have to do that. And we push back with a message of hope, a message that flows from the gospel. But we have to acknowledge the evil ideologies that are out there. And I'm going to ask you to be mature here, and I know that is hard for our society because we live in a very immature society. So an example of why it's important, I'm going to use this example of why it's important that churches do stand up and push back. And it's going to be one that many people are uncomfortable with, because I'm going to be talking about 1933 Germany. Right? So we know where that leads. It leads to the Nazis. It leads to the extermination of Jews. In 1933, no one knew what that outcome was going to be. Okay? But Hitler is beginning to come to power. And he comes to power, and the churches in Germany was a very affluent society. Germany, many, if you ever read theology or anything like that, it comes from Germany, right? The Protestantism, which is why we're sitting here today, came from Germany. Martin Luther, right, was the father of the Protestant movement, the Lutheran Church, right? Okay, so Germany, it was not an unfaithful place. It was a place that had numerous churches, that was part of its history and its identity. So how in the world does the country that has that kind of a church presence all of a sudden allow a monster to come to power and the atrocities of Nazi Germany to happen? And many people participating in it or looking the other way. That should terrify us. That's not that long ago, historically speaking. And if you look back at that time, and these are kind of ballpark figures, I know, but there were around 18,000 churches in Germany. And so those churches had a choice to make whenever all of this was happening. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a prominent leader in the Confessing Church movement, which was speaking out against Hitler. And he started recognizing this pretty early on in 1933. And he started getting pushback. And many churches didn't like what he was saying. There was an uncomfortable alliance between the church and the government at that time. And Bonhoeffer was raising the alarm. And so about 3,000 churches kind of agreed with Bonhoeffer, and they kind of formed this Confessing Church movement that pushed back against the government and was trying to do what they could and were outspoken against it. You know, around probably 700, 800 of those pastors were arrested. Dietrich Bonhoeffer would eventually be hung in a concentration camp just a short time before it was liberated in the 1940s. So, yeah, it cost the Confessing Church. We're talking about 3,000 out of 18,000 churches. Now, you may say, well, were all those other churches just active Nazis? Well, no. About 3,000 of those churches went kind of all in with the Nazi ideology. There's actually a flag that the Nazi Christian flag that incorporated the swastika and the cross. And so they went all in with the Nazi ideology. Hitler, as he continued to grow in power, he wanted the churches to get rid of anything Jewish. Let's see, that would be the whole Old Testament. And, well, it would be the New Testament too, but he didn't consider that completely anti-Jewish. But Hitler hated God. He hated the Jews. He hated Christians. He wanted religion destroyed. Right? And he convinced some of these churches to go along with them. And some of them actually got rid of the Old Testament. Some of them actually purged Jewish members from their churches. Right? There's a picture of a church. You can see the Nazi symbol. They're draped over the altar. Right? But again, that was only about 3,000. Right? So 3,000 churches were pushing against the evil ideologies of the day. And then about 3,000 churches kind of went all in. That left about 12,000. 12,000 churches that just tried to get by. Right? They played lip service. Some would play lip service. Maybe they hung a Nazi flag outside in the front. Maybe they, outwardly said, we need to support the government. God institutes the leaders. As long as they just let us do what we want to do, you know what? We're not going to say anything. And if they didn't, for the most part, the Nazi government just let them continue to do it because they were being worthless. They weren't doing anything. So the government didn't care about them. But look at what happens when evil ideologies are not pushed back against. The church has a role to play and must identify and push back against evil ideologies. So let's bring that to present time. Are there evil ideologies that our government is supporting, that churches are giving into? And I say most definitely. Over the last couple years, there have been numerous churches that have flown BLM flags, have flown the Rainbow Pride flag. Churches that are starting to have drag queen hours. Trying to subdue the current spirit of the age. And maybe if we fly this flag, maybe they won't pay attention to us. Because after all, we just want to love everyone. God just calls us to love our neighbor. You know, the BLM movement is based in something that inherently is true, right? Black lives do matter. I mean, that's a biblical view. Everyone is created in the image of God. It doesn't matter your race. We're all created in the image of God. But yet that organization, which whenever you see those flags and you see things like that, that was connected to the BLM global organization that has raised millions of dollars. And just start looking at the stories of how that money has been used. It's been used to enrich a very few people. It hasn't even been distributed equally among the local BLM chapters. It's a scam. It is a Marxist organization. The founders of BLM openly say they are Marxist. The Marxist ideology, maybe you agree with the Marxist ideology. If you agree with it, then you agree that that religion and God have no place in society. Because the Marxist ideology is a godless, evil ideology. The BLM movement on their website, I believe they've removed it now, on their website said they were openly against the Western idea of the nuclear family, which the nuclear family is simply a mom and a dad raising their children. Now, how does that help Black families or white families or Asian families or Hispanic families? No, the family is the building block found in Scripture. And you're directly going against that. And yet, there were churches that were supporting BLM. Look at the results of it. Has it helped? There are more dead young Black men this year than there were in 2020. This is not helping. This is an evil ideology designed to sow confusion and chaos and division, and it is leading to the death of Black lives. Not helping. But yet we just want to be for racial reconciliation, so we will support whatever popular ideology of the day may be. Then you have the LGBTQ movement and the flags that are being flown. Because we should love everyone, no matter what they believe or what their lifestyle is. Obviously, that is true. We should not be disrespectful. We should not be hurtful to those who are following a different lifestyle, a lifestyle that goes against the biblical standard. But that still doesn't give anyone the right to mistreat. But that's not what that movement's about. That movement is not just about equal rights. That movement is about destruction, and it is working. We're a long way from the gay marriage argument. Did you know? And from 2020 to 2021, the number of children, this is like 6-year-olds to 17-year-olds, who were diagnosed with gender dysphoria, jumped 70%. 70%. And people say, well, it's because we're finally accepting that. It's finally, we're doing all of this. Okay, believing that if you're born male, believing that you should be a female goes against all basic biology. Now, it is a true condition, and our hearts should go out to those who struggle with it, and we should try to legitimately help them. But that is not the norm. And also, just on an evolutionary, take God out of it. If you believe kind of in the typical science of evolution and things like that, that's a massive change. Evolution takes time. And all of a sudden, to have a 70% increase in 1 year, no, that's not how this works. This is being perpetrated on our children, intentionally trying to confuse our children. And how many churches just, we just want to be nice. We want to help those who are struggling. So we support these movements that are trying to destroy your child. No, we have to stand up against that. We have to push back against that. You may say, well, what does this have to do with our government? These are just ideologies. Because our government has embraced these ideologies. Going back to Romans 13, the government is designed to do good and to hold those who do evil accountable. Our government is failing at that right now. Our government is embracing extreme LGBTQ agenda items. Our government is pushing for more gender-affirming treatment, which that is such a euphemism, that's such a pleasant word for castration, for hormone blockers, for mutilation. Yes, we have a responsibility to speak out against that. Yes, we have a responsibility to love those who struggle with their identity. But our government is not seeking what is good. In the rest of the world, in the Netherlands, they were way ahead of us in a lot of this gender stuff. And especially with children, they are running the other direction. They're saying, whoa, we need to slow down. And here we are going headlong into it. It's evil. Our government, this is just an example. This bill has not passed, but it is trying to be passed. It was introduced in Virginia, the state of Virginia in 2020. It's being reintroduced in 2022. It has added a definition to basically what abuse is of parents to their children. And it adds this. It says, whose parent or other person responsible for his or her care creates or inflicts, threatens to create or inflict, allows to be created or inflicted upon such a child as physical or mental injury on the basis of the child's gender identity or sexual orientation. What that means is if you do not support the gender affirming care of your child, now you are breaking the law. It opens it up to possible misdemeanors. Maybe CPS decides, no, that's a felony. The government is starting to overstep its bounds and not to do good. We have to stand up. Our government is becoming too powerful. This was warned about whenever the nation of Israel decided to bring on a king. And they were warned, this will not go well for you. Well, we are starting, unfortunately, as a nation to treat our government as a king. Just recently, and you may say, well, but overall the government wants to do what's right, wants to take care of us, wants to provide safety, with all this COVID stuff. Right? So we were told, and the government actually admitted in August of 2021 that the vaccine did not stop infection or transmission. And then in September of 2021, the government then instituted mandates that cost people their jobs, their way of life. That is immoral. And now we find out that the vaccine was never even tested to see if it prevented transmission. Right? So that was a lie from the beginning, that the vaccine would prevent you from transmitting the virus. They never even tested it. Our government didn't care. Our government wasn't honest with us. Our government was not looking out for our good. Churches, as Christians, we have to stand up against this. And there are times to say, I will not comply. That does not mean get violent. And sometimes, and you will experience consequences. But the church has a role to play to push back against a government whenever it is not seeking the good of its citizens. And we are at that place. And you have to get involved in what's going on. You have to go out and vote. You have to get out and hold our leaders accountable. I encourage you to think about that, to make sure that you don't. Let's not be like the 12,000 churches who just sat there and were quiet and just didn't want to make a ruckus because they didn't want the government messing with them. No, let's follow the example of the confessing church. Let's speak out against the evil ideologies. And the reason we do that is because we care about Black families. We care about all races. We care about those who struggle with gender dysphoria. We care about those who are gay. We care about all who are created in God's image. But we are not going to follow ideologies that are based in lies and flow straight from hell. We have to push back against that, to stand up for the truth that flows from Scripture. And sometimes that means saying, I will not comply. Thank you for joining us tonight. I encourage you to develop your relationship with God, because it is through Him and Him alone that we will find the wisdom and the strength to navigate what's coming in the future.